Hi, and welcome back to the second presentation of today. I'm very pleased to have Sedana Medical with us today, and I think this is one of the more exciting presentations. So very pleased to have the CEO, Johannes Dahl, with us here today to present the company. And with that, I think I'll leave the floor over to you to present.
Yes, thank you very much for that kind introduction. Thanks for having us, and thanks to all of you for taking the time and your interest in Sedana Medical. If we could skip our disclaimer slide and just jump to page 3, please. If you've not come across us, Sedana Medical is a Stockholm-based medical device and now also pharmaceutical company. We're roughly 100 colleagues, and the reason for all of us to get up in the morning, our purpose, is to improve life during and beyond sedation. And in order to live up to that purpose, we are working very hard to make inhaled sedation with our Sedaconda products the global standard therapy for patients in intensive care units. And of course, I will get much more into what that means and how that works and why it's important. But in short, we are the only company that is offering an on-label solution for inhaled sedation, meaning sedating patients with a gas in the intensive care unit. If we jump to the next page, please. Who are the patients that we are talking about here? So we're talking about the intensive care unit. So by definition, very critically ill patients. 30 million patients, if you look at the world every year, need care in an ICU, intensive care unit. And a little less than half of these patients don't breathe enough themselves, and they need help breathing with a ventilator. So they need help breathing with the machine. And that can have a range of different reasons. Nowadays, of course, most people's mind jumps to COVID-19 right away, which could be one reason. But the list is very long. Could be that the patient had an accident, a surgery, cardiac arrest, multiple organ failure, pneumonia, sepsis. There's a whole list of reasons, and COVID-19 is actually the minority of patients today. Now, if you imagine you're one of these patients, it's probably easy to understand that it's a very uncomfortable situation. You're in an environment that you don't know, the ICU. You're most likely in pain, you're scared, you're anxious, you have a tube down your throat and a machine forcing oxygen into your lungs. A very uncomfortable situation, and easy to understand that a lot of these patients need sedation because it's much easier to tolerate this situation when you sleep, or at least are calmed down and relaxed a little bit. And these are these 8 million patients that are mechanically ventilated and sedated. That is our addressable market for our products. And that population is growing 5% a year just because all of us get older. So that's simply with demographics. If you go to the next page, please. The way that sedation has been done for decades is intravenous sedation. So a needle in your arm, and you usually would get propofol. And we are here to change that standard of care. Intravenous sedation with propofol works. A lot of physicians are very comfortable with it. It has been used for a long, long time, but it comes with a couple of important drawbacks. Propofol, like some of the other IV drugs, accumulate in the body, meaning that the longer you are sedated, the more you will have in the system. And what you will then see is that these patients take a long time to wake up. And when they wake up, they often have neurological problems like hallucinations or delirium. And there's also something that is called propofol infusion syndrome, which is quite rare, but it still happens in roughly 1% of all patients. And if it occurs, it can very often be deadly. And the big advantage of inhaled sedation, so sedating a patient with a gas, as you would usually do it in the operating theater, but it's not yet been done in the ICU as much, is that you breathe in the gas and you breathe it out. Only a very, very small fraction stays in the body, so you don't have the accumulation. So for our drug isoflurane, that number is 0.2% that stays in the body. Everything else gets breathed out right away. And that means that you will see these patients wake up faster, they recover faster from sedation, they need less opioids, and they will breathe more spontaneous, which is important for the time after the ventilator time. We've shown all that in a big clinical trial with 300 patients, which I will get to. If we then move on to the next page, please. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of the device. So this black thing is our Sedaconda ACD. The beauty of that is you don't, as a hospital, you don't need to invest in any new capital equipment. It's a disposable, and it works with all common ventilators. So it simply gets inserted into the existing breathing circuit of whatever ventilator the hospital has at its disposal, between what's called the endotracheal tube and the Y piece, which is on the patient patient side. And the way it works is our device turns the liquid gas into a gas. The patient breathes in the gas, starts being sedated. And then when the patient breathes out, or the machine breathes out, 90% of that gas gets captured by the device and goes back into the patient next time they breathe in. And the remaining 10% is captured by a scavenging system, just so you don't have any room exposure. And that is so much more efficient compared to what's, for example, done in the operating theater, where everything that the patient is breathing out gets usually sucked into the wall and goes into the atmosphere. So it's a very efficient system. Next slide, please. So we are in a quite unique situation because, as I said, the therapy consists of the device and the gas. And the device has actually been approved for quite a while, and we've actually been selling it in more than 40 countries. But no volatile anesthetic, so none of the gases was approved for use in the intensive care unit. So what customers had to do was to buy our devices and then basically carry over the gas from the operating theater where these gases are used, but not approved in the ICU. And now with the approval that we got and the clinical trial that we ran, we are now the first and the only company that can offer the full therapy consisting of both the device and the volatile anesthetic Sedaconda isoflurane. And then if we move to the next page, what's quite interesting for us is that despite that previous off-label status, we've actually had some pretty good traction already. So Germany is our main market. In Germany, more than half of the intensive care units are already using our device. Maybe not all of them to the scale that we would like, but it's a very good starting base for us, of course, to have half of these ICUs already as customers. And then on a global scale, as I said, more than 40 countries, not to the same level as we see it in Germany, but a very good starting base, of course, for us to have this existing use that we can start from. If we then move to the next slide. Thank you. From an operational perspective, there's two big priorities that we have in Sedana. Of course, now that we have the approval in Europe, making sure that inhaled sedation gets as widespread as possible. So we've launched the gas in the first countries earlier this year, which was a very important milestone for the company. And now we're working on making that as widespread as possible. And the other priority, also very, very important, even though it's still a few years out, it's very clear that one day the United States will be our largest potential market. And we've just started a big clinical program in the US, which is, of course, also a very important milestone for our company. If you go to the next slide, please. These are, just to give you an overview, the countries where we are already approved. So if you know a little bit about the regulatory landscape in Europe, this was a decentralized procedure, meaning we put a request for marketing authorization on a central level, and we got that approved last summer. And then the process goes on into the national authorities, and you get national approvals. 15 countries have been included in our submission. 14 have already given the okay. The one that we're still waiting for is Poland. We've not heard anything negative from Poland, but they're just taking their time. And then there's 3 more countries in Europe where we're also expecting approval this year, which is Switzerland, outside the EU, UK, due to Brexit. Both of them have their own processes, and Italy is on a slightly different track here compared to the other countries. But if all goes well, we should see approval in Poland, UK, Switzerland, and Italy also this year, which would then basically cover all the important markets in Europe. Next slide, please. We kind of divide the world, the Sedana world, in 2 parts. The countries where we go direct, meaning we have our own field force, and the rest of the world where we are working through distributors and are selling our products through distributors. These are the countries where we have our own feet on the ground in Germany, France, Spain, the UK, Nordics, and the Benelux countries. And I really think this is one of the main strategic assets in this company, because we've made a decision to hire former ICU nurses into our field force. And now I'm hoping that most of you have not spent a lot of time in an ICU, but it's of course a very hectic, can be a high stress environment. And it's just a big advantage having somebody who has worked in that environment before and knows how things work. And it's easier to teach a nurse how to be a good salesperson, as opposed to teach a salesperson to know everything about the ICU. Because as you can imagine, the tolerance for salespeople in an ICU standing in the way, not really knowing their stuff, is very, very low. So I think we've taken the right decision, and we're seeing that they come with a much higher level of credibility when it comes to both physicians and also the nurses. If you move on to the next slide, please. As I said, we had a very, very important milestone earlier in the year. Our first launch market for the drug, the pharmaceutical, was in Germany in February. Now the product is also available in Sweden. It's also available in the Netherlands, and we will add more countries over time. The reason why not all countries launch at the same time, but there's a bit of a time lag in between, and we have the staggered approach, is that in many countries you have to go through a local pricing and reimbursement process to make sure your product is listed properly and you have a price. And that takes different amount of time in different countries, depending on how complex that process is and how collaborative the authorities are, etc. So what we will see over this year is basically a staggered launch plan. And assuming if we get the UK approval, which of course we assume and we hope for, then we should have the drug on the market in all of the major markets in 2022. Now, the big question, of course, is what can we expect in terms of uptake? From an ambition perspective, it's very clear. We are the only therapy that is approved for this kind of use in the ICU. So the ambition, of course, has to be that we convert a lot of today's off-label usage to our on-label drug, but we've also guided towards a more gradual ramp-up as opposed to a straight line. And that is because countries don't launch at the same time, as I've already said, and also within countries, you have to maneuver the purchasing processes of each hospital. So from an account-to-account level, there's quite some executional work to be done, working with the committees, making sure you deal with the group purchasing organizations and so forth. That doesn't get switched overnight, but the initial discussions are very, very promising, and we're seeing some very positive signs. But we still want to be prudent and not make people expect that overnight everything will be switched to our drug, but it will be a more gradual ramp up as you typically see in a launch. If you move to the next slide, please. Another very important milestone for us back in January, we got a guidance published by NICE. So that's an institution in the UK, National Institute for Care and Health Excellence. And that guidance was great for us in two ways. They recommended the use of Sedana ACD for inhaled sedation, which they don't give out recommendations very lightly. And they also confirm a very substantial health economic saving for the hospital. So they came to the conclusion that a patient on inhaled sedation saves the hospital £3,800 compared to a patient on IV sedation. So if you go to the next page, that now puts us in a very nice position where we can not only talk about the clinical benefits that we have shown in Z001, that was the name of our study in Europe. So we can talk about lower opioid use, more spontaneous breathing, shorter and more predictable wake up. We also showed a 4-day reduction in ICU stay versus IV sedation in a post-hoc analysis, which is very, very meaningful. And at the same time, being as good as propofol when it comes to the sedation efficacy as such. So nobody has to worry about the patients not being sedated properly. So we can talk about that. But at the same time, we also have health economic benefits to talk about. As I said, £3,800 per patient saving. And that's not something that we have cooked up in some Excel sheet, but that is something that NICE, which is a very reputable institution, has confirmed. And that, of course, will give us a lot of tailwind, both in the UK, where of course, people are not forced to use our products based on that guidance, but those guidances do come with an expectation of being implemented, and they usually get some recognition also outside the UK. So it's a very, very important tool for us. If you go to the next slide, please. If we switch gears and go to the US, so I already said very clear the US is the largest potential market for us. Of course, from a population perspective, there's 5 times more ICU beds than our today's largest market, Germany. That's maybe not a surprise. But what's also true is that the prices that are being paid in the US for propofol, so the reference therapy on a net level, so what hospitals are actually paying, is 3 to 4 times higher than what is in Germany. So both from a volume and a price perspective, it's a very, very good potential market. And at the same time, the target group, intensive care units, is relatively concentrated. So you have less than 5,000 hospitals in the US that do have intensive care. And they, of course, tend to be more in the metropolitan area. So even for a relatively small Swedish company like ourselves, it's a manageable investment. And that's why we've also decided last year that we would not partner out the product, but we build our own commercial organization in the United States and launch the products ourselves. And of course, we keep the option open to complement that US presence with maybe a partnership if we believe that adds value, faster ramp up, or more access to hospitals, etc. But at least we've now taken our destiny in our own hands. We raised the money, so we also have the financial muscle to pull this through. If you go to the next page, speaking of important milestones, we've just had our first patient in the US. So with FDA, we've agreed on 2 clinical trials that we run, Inspire ICU 1 and 2. We got the IND approval back in December and now started up the first site just in April. We're looking at a 500 patient study roughly, and from a setup perspective, it's very similar to the study that we've already successfully run in Europe. So both the primary endpoints and the secondary endpoints are more or less the same. And of course, there's never a study with 0 risk, but of course, we're quite confident since we've shown the very good results in Europe already. And there's, of course, no medical reason why it wouldn't work in American patients as well. If you then go to the next page, just to have a quick look at the timeline. So we just started these clinical trials. We expect them to run into next year. And then if all goes according to plan and we recruit patients fast enough, we are hoping that we can put in the NDA submission in Q1 24. There's a 10-month review time. So we would look at an NDA approval before the year end 2024, and most likely a launch in early 2025, simply because you tend not to launch just before Christmas. Next page, please. I've talked about Europe and US being the main priorities. There's also good progress in other parts of the world. We got approval in such countries as Turkey, Argentina, Brazil. We submitted in China. We got approval in Indonesia. All of this is for the device part, not yet for the drug. And there's some very important regions in the world like South America where we're actually generating some good sales already. So just to show that there's good progress in these parts of the world as well. But then if we move on to the next slide, please. If you look at it from a business perspective, before COVID, Sedana was growing kind of steadily, slowly, and then we had in 2020 we doubled the sales and further increased them in 21, and now in 22 that has come down a bit, the number again after COVID, but we're still above the longer term trend, which is and the explanation for that is that during COVID, a lot of hospitals started using our products, got comfortable with it, and now are also using it in patients that are not COVID patients. And that's if you move to the next page, what's quite interesting right now is we are seeing after COVID, as intensive care is kind of resetting after COVID, we are seeing a contraction, temporary contraction of our addressable market. So of course, COVID patients are getting less and less. That was very much expected. But what happened at the same time, especially with Omicron, which was much milder, so we didn't have the patients in the ICU anymore, but it was very infectious. So a lot of hospital staff was sick, and that reduces the capacity in ICUs. There's less surgeries. Also, people are still observing more hygiene measures. They're wearing face masks, so you have less community-acquired infections. So overall, right now, we have a situation where there's much less patients in the ICUs that need to be ventilated, which of course for humanity is a very good thing. At the same time, it also reflects in our sales that our sales have also come down temporarily in the first quarter. But most of these effects, like the surgeries being postponed and the capacity in the ICU and hygiene measures and so forth, we expect them to be temporary. So we should get back to normal over the next couple of quarters as well. If we then move to the next slide, And I'll not go through all the details here. It's a lot of text. So we are thinking about our growth in several horizons. So this year we might still be facing a market just as the world is resetting after COVID. That's a bit contracted with less patients in the ICU. At the same time, operationally, it's a very exciting year for us because we will launch in all these markets, as I've talked about. As I said, the ambition is to launch in all the direct markets by end of the year, and we're of course working on increasing the inhaled sedation penetration. Then, when things get to normal, we should hopefully see that as well in our results. And of course, we will be working hard to drive towards the standard of care as much, because we do bring the better solution. So there's no reason for us to hide in a niche. We really want to replace propofol as much as possible. We've guided for 500 million SEK in Europe in 2025. And of course, there's also an ambition to convert a lot of the off-label sales of isoflurane to on-label. And then after 24 and after 25, as I said, with the addition of the US market, then of course the addressable market becomes much larger. If then I move to my last slide, what I would like to leave you with, and this is an analogy I use quite a lot. If you just imagine for a second that inhaled sedation was already the standard of care. So all hospitals were using this for 20 years. All physicians are completely comfortable with it. And then you have a new entrant come into the market called propofol. And all they can say is, well, it's not a better sedative. And if you use it, your patient will need more painkillers, more opioids. They will breathe less, and it will take longer for them to wake up. And by the way, they will hang out in your ICU 4 days longer. Then what do we think the standard of care should be here? And how concerned would we be about a new entrant like this? And that I think should be the mindset for us. We're really bringing the better solution for these critically ill patients. So we're helping to convert a lot of that market to the better therapy. And with that, I know I'm 1 minute over time, so I'll stop here and open it up for questions.
Thank you very much, Anders. It was a very interesting presentation. And I think we should start off with sort of the regulatory setting in the US market. I know you covered this briefly, but it's, to me, an important part of the sort of investment case for Sedana. And as for you, with most medtech companies, the US market is quite significant. And the sort of clinical endpoints that you talked about are similar to the one you've already proven. But sort of thinking about the 505(b) pathway in the US and what it sort of means to have a similar drug already approved in the US, could you talk a bit more about why you maybe see this path as sort of feasible and maybe easier than others in the US?
Yeah, so the regulatory pathway, you're exactly right, is called 505(b)(2). What that means, basically, it's not a new molecule. So isoflurane has been around for a long time. And as I said, it has been used for surgeries in the operating theater. So there is some safety data and toxicology data that is already existing. And 505(b)(2) means that you don't have to create all the data yourselves, but you can bridge, that's called bridge to existing data, and can use them in your submission. Still, what we're doing is we're bringing a drug that's only been used in the operating theater to the intensive care unit. And that's a very different use, because in the operating theater, you will have a surgery for a couple of hours, and you will be very, very deeply sedated. In the intensive care unit, it's very common that patients are sedated for several days, so much longer, but at a lighter level. You don't need to go into very deep sedation. You just need to sedate them lightly so they can tolerate the ventilator. And there, FDA, of course, has asked us, and that was the same for the European authorities as well, to show that it's effective and safe in that longer term use. So while we can bridge to a lot of the safety data and toxicology data and some of the other experience with isoflurane, we still have to run these 2 trials, which we were quite happy that the FDA accepted more or less the same trial setup as we had in Europe. It's a non-inferiority trial. So the primary endpoint is that we need to show that we are as good as propofol when it comes to sedation. There's a sedation scale, how that gets measured. And basically what we have to show is that we can stay within a certain range, which actually is a quite broad range as good as propofol can do that. So it's a little bit like showing your autopilot in the car can stay between 80 and 110 or something like that. And then the really interesting endpoints are the ones where we came out better than propofol, the secondary endpoints in the European trial. So these are things like opioid use, these are things like spontaneous breathing, wake-up times, and of course, if we can show an advantage as we did in Europe, then we can also promote that and show to healthcare professionals that this is the better therapy.
All right, perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think that sounds super promising. Unfortunately, we're out of time for more questions, even though I had some. But I found this super interesting, and I hope everyone listening in did as well. And we'll take a short break before going with the next company, Implantica, here in 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And if there's more questions, you know where to find us. Have a nice day.
You too.